Good morning, everybody. My name is Julie Rake. I practice integrative mental health in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm this year's chair for the board of the Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona. And this video today is brought to you by the Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona. Today's video is going to delve into some aspects with regard to stress. How can we recognize the signs of stress, and what are some things that we can do to support our body and our brain? During this unprecedented time in history, while we navigate the COVID-19 global pandemic, this has been a truly uncharted voyage for all individuals. Many people whose jobs are not deemed essential are home for the first time in years with nowhere to go other than potentially heading out to the grocery store or going on a walk. There are incredible feelings of isolation. There might be a family where one individual has an essential job and they're going out and the rest of the family is quarantined at home all of the time. But regardless, during this very unusual time, we are seeing a rise of many mental health conditions that have to do with an elevated level of stress. In particular, I would say one of the fastest rising disorders are the anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders they fall underneath an umbrella, and they can range from generalized anxiety disorder to anxiety with panic attacks. Individuals might be experiencing worsening of their obsessive compulsive tendencies. Some individuals notice that if they've had trauma or experienced post-traumatic stress, that these symptoms are exacerbating at this time. So what we'll delve into first is, first of all, what are some signs of stress? Now, these are highly individual. They run the gamut. So what we'll see is feelings of worry, feelings of being overwhelmed, possibly moodiness, irritability, constant worry. We might see some behavioral changes such as eating more or less than what you're used to eating. There might be pacing or fidgeting or nail biting. For some individuals, they might have ramped up the desire to self-medicate with drugs or alcohol. There's a lot of physical symptoms that occur, and those would be important to understand. When the body is under increased stress, let's say in this case we're talking about elevated stress and anxiety, this turns on the one branch of the nervous system. If you are unfamiliar with it or need a little reminder, there's two branches of the autonomic nervous system. And on one side, we have the what we could say generically, we could call it the stress side, scientifically termed the sympathetic nervous system, also often referred to as fight or flight. And then on the other side over here, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, and that side of the nervous system brings us into a state of rest. Sometimes it's called rest and digest. So if an individual is shifted over here into a more stressful state, what is occurring is there are a variety of stress hormones such as epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, and they course through the body and the brain, And they don't just target one organ system. In fact, we are one unit, one organism, so every organ system in the body is affected. So we might just pull out some organ systems and say the cardiovascular system, if you're feeling more stress in your life, you might notice an elevated heart rate. Some people might be experiencing increasing blood pressure numbers. It could be that there's even in more extreme cases, heart palpitations. If we get into the gastrointestinal system, we might find individuals suffering with different types of gastrointestinal distress, stomach upset, irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, maybe heartburn or gastric reflux. This can move into every organ system, really. If we were to discuss the musculoskeletal system, you might be recognizing that maybe you're waking up in the morning, recognizing that you've been clenching your jaw at night, maybe experiencing neck ache, headache, back pain. And then, of course, our immune system is affected. When we're under a lot of stress, our immune system takes a hit. So we get sick a lot easier. We might recognize that we're getting sick more often. So those are some of the physical symptoms. Moving into what we can do to support our body and our brain during this time, I think the first thing to highlight is that evidence suggests that keeping a routine is highly effective in lowering stress levels. And there's a lot of different reasons for this. Makes life more predictable, number one. You can add in all the things that you need to get done in a day, whether that is a certain task list, to-do list, getting your work done, and then you can also add in time for exercise or self-care. But having a routine is one of the easiest ways to start to get the body and the brain a little bit more relaxed. In a time such as a quarantine, I've talked to individuals who are staying up and staying online until 3, 4, 5 in the morning and then sleeping until noon. And it just gets the body really off track. I would just highlight that. Number one is routine. We'll go through a list of other things to support our body and brain, but maybe one of the most important things to support our bodies at any time, but in particular during times of stress, is talking about food. Now, there is a huge body of evidence that food affects our mood. And you've probably heard of this before, but foods such as highly refined processed carbohydrates, things in boxes, foods laden with sugar, fried, fatty, greasy, fast foods, your very low quality factory farm meats or processed meats can leave us feeling a variety of negative ways, everything from feeling tired and foggy to literally moving into the creation of depression. What research has been discovering over the past decade or more is that when we eat foods that aren't, I would say, quote unquote, real foods. So you might think of things such as snack cakes or processed foods, foods in boxes, foods that you pull off the shelf that have 20, 30, 40 different ingredients in them. Well, those foods have an awful lot of artificial colors, artificial flavors, preservatives, a lot of chemicals. And then we get into, of course, sugar and trans fats. Well, when these highly reactive molecules and inflammatory particles travel around the brain. The brain's nervous system is actually turned on. These nervous system cells are called microglial cells. And what we now know about microglial cells is that once they're turned on, they create an awful lot of inflammation. And this inflammation can exacerbate depression and neurodegenerative diseases, such as different types of dementias. So one other factor before we get a little more detailed in diet that I think is really of importance is the food that we eat predicts the health of our gut bacteria. You've probably heard the term probiotics by now. In our gut, we have many, many billions of bacteria, and those bacteria have so many jobs that are really important. Everything from helping us digest our food and helping in our immune system, army, to one of the things that I find the most important is that we have discovered this neurotransmitter that we thought was solely produced in the brain called serotonin, which modulates mood and sleep and is sometimes referred to as the feel-good neurotransmitter. Well, about 90% of that neurotransmitter is actually made by our gut bacteria. So you can imagine if you have a very wholesome, high nutrient dense whole foods diet, you probably have a very healthy, robust gut bacteria. If we have an individual, say, that likes to go and have a breakfast burrito from AM, PM, and a couple Red Bulls in the morning, and maybe lunch is fast food, hamburger and French fries, and this general pattern, we can assume that that person likely has a very poor gut bacteria. So that individual with a really robust and healthy diet is likely making really good, healthy amounts of the feel-good neurotransmitter serotonin. So here's just a few things to think about with respect to diet that maybe you've never thought about before. If you think about maybe 1900, so 100 and something years ago, all we really had to eat at that time were fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, beans, whole grains like quinoa, amaranth, barley, spelt, maybe animals that grazed on grass and fish that were freshly out of an ocean that fed on plankton. And then if you fast forward to even 20 years ago, but in particular today, what we see in the entire center of the grocery store is food that is in packages. And every one of those packages varies, but there could be anywhere from 5 to 6 up to 50 different ingredients in a box. And when you browse through those ingredients, what you'll find is you'll find artificial colors, artificial flavors, thickeners, preservatives. There is just an unlimited amount of chemicals that are abundant in all of these foods. So we have to ask ourselves, what are these foods doing to our brain? We know, we've known for a long time now that we've seen a rise in things like childhood allergies, asthma, eczema. We've seen a rise in autoimmune illnesses and cancers, and we've linked many of those to food. But what is food doing to our brain? So just a little something to think about when we're having that food from a box and there's 45, 50 ingredients in it. The next piece of interesting food fact is sugar. We've all heard the horror stories about sugar, such as diets very high in sugar are pro-inflammatory. They cause us to get into a chronic disease earlier, such as heart disease. They are very aging on the skin and on the body. One really interesting factor about sugar, and many of you may already know this, is that sugar is highly addictive. In fact, when we eat, let's just say it's Ben & Jerry's ice cream or Krispy Kreme donuts, when that sugar is delivered in the brain, what happens is the pleasure center of our brain, the nucleus accumbens, gets a blast of dopamine. And that's why eating something like a big piece of chocolate cake with frosting feels so good, because we get a hit of dopamine. So it's really using the same pleasure centers of our brain than we would be utilizing if, say, an individual were using illicit drugs like cocaine or heroin. And if we continue to eat highly dense, sugar-laden foods, what we'll find that we want more and more. And just like any other addiction, we'll find that we feel like we need more to get that same pleasure. And so just something to really consider. If you start off your day with a high sugar load, and that could even include orange juice and a couple donuts, you might notice that by noon you're ravenously hungry, because that blood sugar goes sky high and then it takes a dive, and then we're ravenously hungry and ready to do it all over again and crave. So that's another little interesting tidbit about diet. These are some of my favorite things about diet. There's another factor, and that is the multi-billion-dollar flavor industry. So there was a book published, I believe in 1985. It was called The Dorito Effect. And this book discusses how overproduction of our food sources, as well as our animal sources, have been so overproduced that along the way, these different foods, whether they are a tomato or a strawberry or whatever food we're talking about that's been overprocessed, they have lost a tremendous amount of nutrient value. And so a multi-billion-dollar flavor industry stepped in to remedy this. And that's why things such as Doritos, when you have Doritos and you lick the orange pasty film off your fingers and it tastes so good, that has to do with these powerful flavor molecules. They incentivize us to eat more of them, and they're not good for us. And what's really interesting is our whole foods like blueberries or whole grains, oatmeal, quinoa, they actually have satiety molecules in them. What that means is satiety molecules would tell us we're full, we've had enough, but there are no satiety factors in flavor enhancers, so we're incentivized to eat more for more than one reason. Another thing about sugar is that oftentimes Alzheimer's, dementias have been coined diabetes type 3 because diabetics have twice the risk of getting into dementias, and that has to do with sugar's effect on the brain and the earlier onset of neurodegenerative diseases, which means what that means is brain degenerative diseases. Our food has lost an awful lot of its nutrient value. Kind of touched on that before, but the soil has been so over-tilled and overused that our foods don't have as much nutrient value as they used to have. Trans fats, people are more educated now about trans fats, but they were created in the laboratory in the early 1900s. And they made it possible to put a Twinkie on the shelf and have it not go bad for a very long time. Before trans fats, if we had to use different types of butter, foods would spoil fairly quickly, but with the creation in the laboratory of trans fats, its first major product being Crisco, things could now go onto the shelf and they didn't have to be refrigerated, and they would stay on that shelf without spoiling for maybe years. So it was discovered in probably as early as the 1950s that trans fats were causing heart disease and heart attacks, and it went largely ignored at that time, but this information started to become more and more well known within the past 20 years, and so trans fats are labeled. You'll often find those in margarines and things like snack cakes and potato chips, so watch out for trans fats. And I have to just say a small tidbit on factory farming. Another thing, 100 years ago, maybe an individual was hunting an animal who was eating grass, and that grass conferred nutrients to the animal, and then when the human ate the animal, it also conferred a lot of nutrients to the human, nutrients such as omega-3 fats. Same with the fish that were in the ocean eating plankton. That's where they were getting their omega-3 fats. Those are good, healthy fats. And then that would be transferred to the human that ate the fish. Within the last 50 years or so, the majority of all the animals that we consume in America are coming from feedlot. They're called factory farmed animals. They are large industrial organizations in which a massive number of animals are placed in very small confined spaces, and they are fed a diet of a genetically modified pesticide-laden corn and soy meal. And so that's one factor. So there's no longer any good fats occurring. Their diet is very poor, and therefore the individual eating that animal, we're getting that poor nutrient profile. And then in addition to that, because those areas are so cramped and overcrowded with animals, antibiotics come onto the scene because there's a lot of disease, and so the animals are given a steady diet of antibiotics, and they're also given a steady supply of hormones so that they can get them fattened up and grown quickly and off to market for a profit. So think about the source, if at all possible, to buy grass-fed, grass-finished animals or wild-caught fatty fish, and some of the more smaller fish that are lower down on the food chain. And so the bottom line with food is incredibly important to our brain and our body. Food affects our mood. Food can contribute to the worsening of depression, different mental health problems, neurodegenerative diseases, and exacerbates many chronic health conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, arthritis. And so if you can really just focus on a whole foods diet, focusing on your fresh fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole grains like oatmeal, quinoa, your lentils, beans, focusing on using an abundant amount of herbs and fresh spices, getting in some different types of tea, such as green tea in your day, utilizing dark chocolate, maybe 70% or greater in moderation. And if you're interested in the diet that probably holds the most evidence in preventing chronic disease processes, that would be the Mediterranean diet, if you'd like to look into that. And so the next topic to browse through is the topic of sleep. Sleep is incredibly important. When we sleep, our brain can actually dump waste or detoxify. Getting good sleep enhances our ability to be creative and to learn. Some of the things that you might want to consider, number one, is your sleep environment. So ideally, one of the most ideal temperatures for a sleeping environment is 67 degrees. You want to have the room dark and comfortable. You want to think about relaxing the nervous system as the evening time rolls in. And you can do this by turning off violent and dramatic television watching. You'll want to turn off your devices as you're trying to go to sleep because, as you know, our devices emit light, and that blue light that those devices are emitting enter the retina, and they inhibit the sleep hormone melatonin. So we don't want that. When darkness arrives, melatonin can be produced, and historically, if you were to wake up outside with the sun, that would inhibit melatonin and waking neurotransmitters would come onto the scene. So we don't want bright light in our eyes as the evening time rolls around. You can also create calming rituals such as meditating, reading books. Some people like to use essential oils such as lavender that are very calming. Some people drink lavender teas or teas that are calming, such as sleepy time teas, taking a warm bath. Anything that calms down the nervous system can become a routine for you to start getting into better sleep. Exercise is actually the first line, what we call the first line treatment when we treat anxiety disorders and depression. There's a few different reasons for that. Exercise floods the brain with endorphins, and endorphins help with things like pain reduction and mood elevation. So we want those feel-good endorphins, and the brain also secretes a healthy substance when we exercise, and that substance is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, it allows our brain to be more malleable or more plastic or more changeable, and that's a good thing. It protects existing brain cells, it repairs damaged brain cells, and it allows new brain cells to grow, neurogenesis. So exercise is incredibly important for anybody dealing with depression or anxiety. Incredibly important. Right now, during this time of isolation and quarantine, you could, if your area allows, if you have the correct terrain or a safe space, you can take walks, you can hike. There are many online classes being offered right now. Some you have to pay for. Some of the gyms, local gyms, like say Orange Theory Fitness, they offer a class that you can do in your own living room every morning at 10 a.m. There's a lot of yoga studios who offer their classes online. And then of course you can go on YouTube and you can get any type of fitness regimen you would like for free, whether that be CrossFit, aerobics, weightlifting, yoga. So make that a part of your daily routine. So moving along into the final area, and that is on the topic of stress, our nervous system, and mind-body medicine. So at the beginning, I talked a little bit about our nervous system, in particular, our autonomic nervous system, which is comprised of those two branches. We talked about that sympathetic nervous system, which some of us know as fight or flight. So you see the elevated heart rate, the elevated blood pressure, all the blood moves into the muscles so that we can fight or flee. You might have quicker breathing. You can feel the hormones. You can feel the alertness. The pupils dilate. And then on the other side over here, we have what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's the resting nervous system. It's actually referred to sometimes as rest and digest. We can start to work with this nervous system when we're armed with this information. So think about it this way for a minute. This is an interesting way to think about this. If you have this nervous system over here that is being triggered, this fight or flight, this sympathetic nervous system, and you're seeing the stressors every day, and there's already a variety of stressors that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether those stressors are going to work, caring for children, caring for maybe an aging parent, paying bills, financial worries, traffic, fear about insurance or getting sick, or whatever it might be. We already have a certain number of stressors in our life. And then at any given time, there can be greater stressors that an individual is going through. And those stressors could be that a family member has been diagnosed with cancer, or maybe somebody's going through a divorce. And these cause the stressors to become extremely elevated. And then now during this time, we add on what we have now come to know as the COVID-19 global pandemic, and we've been asked to stay in our homes, and people are worried, am I going to get sick? They're worried about, is their family member or their loved one or their grandparent going to get sick or die? There are now concerns about job losses, paying bills, and the wider economic outlook. And so as we have these stressors and they build and they build and they build, there's actually a part of the brain that gets very worked up. And so in a very simplistic way, imagine that very worked up, overreactive, anxious nervous system. Imagine it almost like an infant who is crying hysterically because they're hungry and they've got a wet diaper. And what we need to do is we need to become aware of that situation and feed the baby and change the diaper. But what we would also do at that moment is we would soothe. And so if we think about this overreactive nervous system, how can we soothe our nervous system? What are the steps we can take to soothe and calm our nervous system? I have a short list here that we'll go over. One of the very best ways to calm down and relax is by doing what we call breath work. You can go online and find 5 or 10 different types of breath work that speak to you, that you enjoy doing. The one that I most often teach and practice twice a day is called the 4-7-8 breath. This breath exercise is called 4-7-8 because you breathe in through your nose slowly for a count of 4. You hold your breath for a count of 7, and you breathe out for a count of 8. So this is what it looks like. That's one round. you'll want to practice that for 4 rounds total. So you're breathing in through the nose for a count of 4, you're holding the breath for a count of 7, you're blowing it out through your mouth for a count of 8. That's 1 round. Do that for 4 rounds total. That is a very good way to shift the nervous system. And just since we're talking about shifting the nervous system, the way that actually is occurring is we have a nerve. It's called the vagus nerve. It starts at the base of the brain and it travels all the way down to the low abdomen area. In Latin, vagus means wandering. So it's like the wandering nerve. And this wandering nerve has wispy fingers that touch all of our organs. And we want to activate the vagus nerve, because when we activate that vagus nerve, we can go from that stress, fight or flight nervous system to that rest and digest, relaxed nervous system. So the 478 activates our vagus nerve. Second is different types of meditation. You can try any of the 3 main types of meditation to see which one speaks to you. I say that there are 3 main types. The first main type of meditation is what we call mantra meditation. That simply means that we're using a word or a phrase of your choice, and we're repeating that over and over silently inside of our head as a way to quiet down this treadmill of thoughts that's going on in our head. And so as we repeat the mantra, we find that we've wandered and we're now in a thought, and then once we recognize it, we bring ourselves back and we continue to repeat that mantra. That's mantra meditation. Second type of meditation is called mindfulness. And mindfulness is a type of meditation that grounds us in the present moment. And the beauty of the present moment is that if we can arrive into the present moment, we're not in the past ruminating over what has happened, whether that's upsetting or sorrowful, and we're not focusing into the future, which is often riddled with fears and worries, but we're practicing being right here in the present moment. And we can do that by tuning in to all of our senses. We can focus on our breath. Finally, a third type of meditation is more of a type of meditation where we meditate on maybe positive thoughts such as joy or kindness, compassion, or love. There's a good meditation called Metta, M-E-T-T-A, in which we meditate on those positive thoughts. But if you're interested and have never tried this but are looking to give it a try, if you have an Android or an iPhone, you can download the free app called Insight Timer. And on the Insight Timer app, you can look up any one of these I just discussed. You can look up a mantra meditation, you can search for mindfulness meditation, or you can search one that has a topic, whatever topic you might need. It might be stress reduction, or it could be enhancing sleep. So that's available to you as a free app. Insight, INSIGHT Timer, has a little bowl on the app. Third, another wonderful way to reduce stress, we talked about it a minute ago, but it is exercise. And exercise does stimulate the production of those endorphins, which elevate our mood. And there are other types of exercise that are very beneficial in reducing stress and anxiety and improving depression scores. And these are exercise programs such as weightlifting, Tai Chi, yoga. They're all very good for reducing anxiety, stress, and depression. talked about it for a minute, but going out into nature, and nature has a profound effect on the brain. You can look that up, the effect nature has on stress, if you're interested in that. There's some other cultures. I believe the Japanese culture has different programs where there are individuals who are overly stressed with their careers go out and they bathe by walking and spending time in nature as they see their stress levels reducing rapidly. So being in nature essentially calms down or disables our stress centers, and it allows those more calm and joyful relaxation centers of the brain to be utilized. So if it's at all possible, get out into nature. Get early morning sunshine, about 20 minutes if possible. Not only does that lift the mood, having sunlight come into our retina, not by staring at the sun, even through closed eyes, that sunlight coming in through the retina can stimulate the production of the feel-good neurotransmitter serotonin. And getting that early morning sunlight also helps in that evening's sleep. Also discussed it a little bit already, but you could try some essential oils, in particular trying lavender essential oil. That's got a very calming effect. And reducing caffeine. Reducing caffeine content, especially after 3 o'clock, but if you are experiencing higher levels of stress and anxiety, you might consider eliminating it after noon or eliminating it altogether, maybe weaning down into drinking tea instead. And some other ways to reduce stress are journaling, doing creative work like art. Definitely want to connect with others. I think a big part of the stress that is occurring is this isolation. There are many people who live alone and they're feeling more isolated than ever. We are, by nature, we are meant to connect with others and live in groups. And when we're completely isolated, we can get in our own mind very easily and see those elevated stress levels rise. So if you can't connect with somebody right now face to face, maybe you can make a telephone call or do a FaceTime or a Zoom chat, but get connected. Music is great medicine. Laughter is great medicine for the nervous system. And finally, there are a few supplements that you can utilize. If you've never really experimented with supplements, a good way to do that is by trying medicinal teas. And some of the best teas are, there is one in particular, it's made by Traditional Medicinals, and it's called chamomile lavender, and it contains chamomile, lavender, and lemon balm. Those are all three really potent. They're called nervines. What that means is they're anxiolytic, or they reduce anxiety. So you can try some teas, lemon balm, chamomile, lavender. They offer kava kava tea. You don't want to drink that if you have any liver disease or if you drink heavily, as too much of that can cause liver issues. There's valerian root and passion flower, and there's a variety of other supplements that you can utilize. Those are really the highlights. Know that everything that's going on right now is, again, it's really unprecedented. We've never in our lifetimes experienced a situation in which we were asked to be quarantined in our home, and there's so much unknown and uncertainty, but it's looks like this will soon pass. And know that if you're feeling stress, anxiety, lonely, irritable. It's really normal. A lot of people are feeling those same things right now. And this will pass, and you can start practicing some of these things that we talked about today to feel better. And the other thing is, if your stress levels are really getting up there, specifically anxiety and depression, they're so profoundly, there's so much good treatment. So we'll get through this. Everything will be okay. And please feel free to reach out to the Brain Injury Alliance if you need to contact me or would like our assistance. And take care of yourself and your families. The best to you. And until next time, have a good day.